I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Well, it's Justice Monday, or Celebrity Justice, or Mr./Mrs. Justice USA, whatever you want to call it. It's the reality show of picking the next Supreme Court Justice of the United States. And well hyped. Give the president credit, a very good pitch man. He is most certainly conscious of the ratings, conscious that he's going to be winning. And it'll be interesting to see which of the four finalist contestants, beauty queens, whatever you want to call them, going to be interesting to see which way he goes on that. There's the thought that going to go with the woman because she's most certainly going to get the evangelicals all tickled in the naughty parts. There's the thought going to go with Kavanaugh because Kavanaugh is the one who might not hold him accountable. And then there are the other two that, well, might slide through a little bit easier because the first two, well, they have problems. Going to be interesting to see. We're just minutes away from what that unveiling. And then, the question becomes, just how horrible, how bad will this justice be going forward? It's scary stuff. Now, I do find it interesting that the four conservative Democrats from red states, they've had other things to do. I guess had to get their hair washed, had to, get their nails done, had to, rake the yard, whatever. But Heitkamp from North Dakota not going to be there. Doug Jones from Alabama not going. Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Joe Donnelly from Indiana all turned down the invitation, had previous engagements, whatever you want to say. That to me is is something of a good sign, because if the Democrats can hold them on the no side, and because any one of these four are, I'll be honest, any one of them are bad for a whole bunch of reasons. But especially the first two. The woman, I'll be honest, I'm not thrilled with. Because the first thing that goes is everyone knows Roe is dead. And there's also part of me that goes, okay, well, Roe goes, Republicans are going to be really unhappy. And we're starting to hear that whispering. Even, that Tomi Lahren the other day put out a statement that she's taken some heat from the right on, saying, well, do we really want to do away with Roe? Do we really want to go that way? And I said from the beginning, once they get what they want, could be the end of it, because Roe is a huge fundraising machine. Keeping the dimwits dim-witted, I vote for Republican because they're pro-life. Yet every bit of their policy says no. Once that goes away, do all of those people who were life voters, do they suddenly wake up and go, hold on, the rest of your policies are terrible. The rest of your policies suck, and we're going to look elsewhere. This is what the Republicans are really afraid of. Because if you don't have that one thing there, because I can't tell you how many people I've known. And in fact, there's one guy in particular that I always think about. Was a good union guy, was a great, all down the line politically on every issue was right in line with me. And we were, on the same page until it came to, which side you vote on. He said, I always vote for Republicans. And I go, why is that? He goes, abortion. It's the only issue I care about. Don't care about any of the other stuff. Don't care about the union stuff. Don't care about the social justice stuff. It's only abortion. And I said, well, what happens if they make it illegal and someday down the road your daughter, ends up in one of these back alleys and she dies from this? He goes, and he looked me in the eyes and it still chills me to this day. He goes, I wouldn't shed a tear. And I was like, wow. So maybe by this going away, maybe this going by the wayside, this becomes a moment where for a brief moment we have some collective sanity. I don't know. Maybe some people come back to, oh, wow, that was a bad era. We should wake up and start talking about other things. Don't know. It'll be interesting to see where Trump goes with the choice, because the first two, I mean, this Barrett woman and this Kavanaugh guy, they have problems. There can be some hangups in the process, which have to go really, really quickly to get through the November election cycle. They're going to have to move. And if there's any hiccups that give those 4 Democrats the ability to say, and then throw in Murkowski or Collins or even Rand Paul, you could end up in a scenario where, guess what? Not going to happen. And it appears that Trump has chosen Kavanaugh. And I said this morning, that he was going to go with the guy who would not hold him accountable. I knew all the money was going to be on dumping Roe, but Kavanaugh's the interesting choice in that he was the one who said, we can't go and hold a president accountable. He's the guy who, so there's our choice. And now the fun begins. The fun begins because this is the guy who wrote the opinion that Roberts used to allow the ACA to go forward. So half of the country right now has got to be breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief in that maybe possibly the ACA doesn't get attacked at the Supreme Court. Maybe now you're going to have the 5th vote back because, Roberts was the original 5th vote. Maybe now you have that other 5th vote in Kavanaugh. Not sure. But here again, lots of baggage. And I know that there are people now who are going to be going, for a defense position, Kavanaugh was probably the better choice for people to defend against because he has so much of a history. There's so much record there. You can go back to the Ken Starr days. So I'm looking at this going, well, maybe, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens because I got a bunch of emails today from people like Roger Stone and other groups saying that, Kavanaugh's, he could be the next David Souter, or he could be the next one to flip. Gonna be interesting to see how this plays out. Now on the labor front, which is where I'm generally at, he routinely rules against workers and their families, routinely rejects the rights of employees to receive employer-provided health care in the workplace, sides too often with employers denying employees relief from discrimination, promotes overturning well-established Supreme Court precedent. This is a guy who's going to be, interesting. If you look at some of the cases that he's been involved in, AFGE versus Gates, he dissented, arguing that would allow the Secretary of Defense to abolish collective bargaining altogether. And you pair that with what Trump did today, and you go, this is a guy who on the Supreme Court could be that voice to go, you know what, we're going to do away with unions altogether. He also dissented from the majority in agri-processor versus NLRB, deciding that the company had to bargain with a union, reasoning that the employees were ineligible to vote as undocumented immigrants. So it doesn't matter. You legals get nothing. Also in SeaWorld versus Perez, I guess he dissented from the majority, upholding a safety citation against SeaWorld following the death of a trainer. So there's been a bunch of this stuff that, I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about in the coming days and weeks. Now becomes the defense. Now becomes, how do you look at this guy's writings? And there are lots of them. How do you look at his past rulings and go, hey, is this where we want to go? There are 130 million people with pre-existing conditions who might be, and I don't even know, might be breathing a sigh of relief, or just might have their healthcare completely wiped away. I'm literally kind of shocked at who he chose, even though I called it. It's one of those things. I thought for sure they were going to go the Hardiman way. So going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Today we're going to talk to a couple of experts. Renato Mariotti is going to be here in the second hour to share some of his thoughts. We're also going to get Kevin Mack from the Move to Impeach group, or Need to Impeach group, to share some of his thoughts on this choice. And also Sarah Kendzior is going to be here to share some thoughts on, this and a whole bunch of other stuff. She's had a couple of weeks to build up, to pent up, and I'm hoping for some interesting rage going forward. Also, love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share your thoughts of Mr. Kavanaugh. Will he be the conservative darling, or will he flip and, not be as horrible as the rest of us think? We'll take a quick break. Right back after this with Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. That was the day transit workers in the Bronx walked off the job in what is referred to as the squeegee strike. These were the days when New York City's public transit was barely organized. 2 of the 3 transit companies in New York City were privately owned with entrenched company unions. Up to this point, transit bosses had successfully crushed every previous strike. Now, 6 car cleaners at the Jerome Avenue barn had just been fired for refusing management's imposed speed up. Supervisors had replaced their 10-inch squeegees with those that measured 14 inches. They were expected to clean more in a shorter period of time. According to historian Joshua Freeman, author of In Transit, when word spread that the 6 cleaners had been fired, others downed their tools in protest. They demanded, unsuccessfully, to meet with the shop foreman. After several hours of waiting, they discovered that management had removed their time cards. That's when the 2-day walkout began. As many as 70 workers stormed off the job. Pickets went up outside the barn and at the Interborough Rapid Transit headquarters. The regional NLRB office quickly mediated a settlement that forced the IRT to reinstate the discharged workers and strikers, and to answer their grievances. Freeman notes this first strike, though small in scale and brief, was significant. The victory of the squeegee strike immediately built the TWU's authority citywide. It quickly brought several hundred new members into the union. The new dues-paying members provided a financial base for full-time organizers needed to organize New York City's transit. The union would grow rapidly and soon enjoy a number of organizing victories. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
You know, we hear all these stories about people in the Trump administration getting berated in public for working for the administration. You know, all around Sarah Huckabee Sanders getting chucked out of the Red Hen, which next time I'm in the area, most certainly going to stop in and have dinner there and leave a very nice tip for the folks who work there, because courage right there. But not only that, you had Pruitt when he was still the head of the EPA before he got ousted. He got, basically berated by, I shouldn't say berated. She was very respectful. That school teacher saying, hey, you're screwing with the country. You're screwing with the world with your policies. Also you go through, Stephen Miller, I guess, threw out like $80 worth of sushi because, one of the wait staff had chided him. And then there was the famous one with that Christian Nielsen, leaving the Mexican restaurant, all of that. Now we find out that, well, the face of the Trump administration there, the Kellyanne Conway, I guess her husband gives it to her worse than anybody could possibly give anyone else in public. And I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you have a marriage where you're that divided. Just very bizarre to me. But I always wondered about that Mary Matlin and James Carville. It's just one of those weird dynamics. Anyway, here to talk about what's going on around the world in Washington, D.C., Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So what do you think? I mean, could you exist in a marriage like that where you're completely polar opposites and then obviously
I
bickering
sort of
at each
had
other?
one. We weren't both in politics. But I used to see James Carville and Mary. I would see them out at places, and it was always interesting. I mean, I'd talk to them. I thought it was always interesting. I thought at first it was a fake thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's not. It's not. I mean, they were polar opposites. No,
I mean, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how that dynamic doesn't turn into good on them because they've figured it out because they've been together for a while. But I don't know how you get past that bickering during the daytime leading into the night. Just don't know.
I don't know. Maybe you leave politics at the door.
If you can. But, if you're talking about what you do all day long, then what do you talk about?
True.
What'd you do, honey? Well, I made up a bunch of lies from, of how we're destroying the environment. And I don't know how you do that. Don't know how you do it. Anyway, after today's Supreme Court nomination, Trump's leaving the country. I've seen a lot of reports of saying, well, people on the international stage, they don't really take him all that serious. I'm worried that they do.
Well, I think that, first of all, he does his numbers bump. He does good overseas. And I think that's because when American presidents go overseas, and if they're berated at all, he gets a little bit of sympathy back home that, how dare those foreigners do that. There's a little bit of that. But in Trump's case, I think something that is working weird to his side is that the expectation level of the leaders for Donald Trump is way down low.
Right.
So if you have an expectation level that's higher, say for Obama or say for, George Bush, okay, then things are expected and there's a certain amount that they have to reach of confidence and issues. If the expectation level is low, it's like, okay, can we get out of here without having a fight with him?
Yeah, but
I'm serious. I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, I don't know the expectation level was all that high with Bush. I remember it being very low. Mm-hmm. Obviously higher than with Trump, but still kind of low.
Uh-huh.
Did you see the permit for the blimp in the UK?
No, I heard about it. I figure that there'll be some tweet in reference to the Muslim mayor of London, don't you?
Yeah, of course.
Some type of tweet. Although I must say, look, he's being countered by the Queen and the Prime Minister because the United Kingdom is literally trying to charm him. They're taking him to some kind of place that no president's been there for dinner, and on and on and on. Taking him away from the protests at Downing Street. I was very interested to see, above everybody, that the United Kingdom is just kind of trying to get through this, I would say.
Putting on the charm offensive.
Really? Yeah, they have. I mean, the others aren't. And he and Merkel will just be, not good. He seems to go after her quite a lot. But when it comes to the United Kingdom, I think they just kind of want to get through it.
Yeah, it's like any punishment. I guess you just try and work your way through. But here I guess there are like the Chinese did. You treat them real nice. A bunch of pomp and circumstance. Have little children dance, do whatever, and maybe he doesn't attack you. Maybe then maybe the plan is by the UK going. You know what? Well, we don't want to be the one. Let Germany be the one. Let him go after them.
Yeah. I mean, the Saudis do this too. They had TV screens X amount of feet with his picture on them. The Saudis did that. So with Trump's ego, I think that's the way you probably do it, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. You kiss his behind. You do all you got to do.
He likes combat. He loves combat. He does.
Yeah, you don't fire him up. But here's the thing. He's been going after NATO the whole time, which you got to think Putin's just thrilled with. How do you have a NATO summit where one of the main people are tearing into it?
Mm-hmm. Now, the NATO thing is interesting because he was quoting we were at 75%, which we actually are not in the payments. Now, we are at 22% of NATO, and there are two separate types of payments. And, yes, some of the countries have not upped 2% of their gross national product used for defense, et cetera. So, but it's interesting to see Trump's line, which is economic, and that has turned him against NATO because they're not paying more. I mean, it's not to do with the cause as much as the money. He wants more money into NATO. I just thought it was kind of fascinating. Now, they have not done in NATO what the United Nations has done, which is extreme parties and wasting that kind of money. They just haven't done that in NATO.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a shakedown. And as look, other presidents have done it too, calling for other countries to pay more. But don't you think by having the lion's share, it gives us a much louder voice there? I mean, we basically do whatever we want.
Well, sure. It's NATO, and we're the prime player.
So by tearing it apart, you're kind of tearing that weak coalition apart anyway.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, NATO, we have to have NATO. We all know that.
Well, do we?
Except maybe he doesn't.
I mean, I've got some right-wing friends who go, scrap all of it. Get rid of the United Nations. Get rid of NATO. Get rid of all of it. And I'm going, really? Because they go back to the George Washington thing. We should stay clear of foreign entanglements. I go, but that doesn't mean, ignoring everything around you.
Right. Correct.
That's crazy. Just nuts. Just nuts. So what do you think is going to happen when he meets with Merkel?
Well, I think it's going to be, obviously not pleasant. I think it's going to be combative. She's a bit weak back home. He knows that. He'll take advantage of it. I don't think it's going to be like the most horrible meeting on earth, but I just think it's going to be extremely unpleasant. And, Germany's an ally, so it's not going to be comfortable.
Will we get another great picture of her, kind of, towering over him, with her hands on the table with that scorned look on her face?
I don't know, but those were some good photo ops.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I guess that's the best we can hope out of all this. Because you're right. There was part of me that goes, I wish no one would protest him. I mean, because to me, that would probably be the best thing that could happen. Everyone just ignore him. Nobody show up.
It's easy to patronize in foreign situations. It really is. And, you know that with, back home, you say, well, they're taking advantage of us and it's a foreign country and they don't respect our workers and, on and on and on. But we have some of these countries where we've had historic alliances. And I think we have to be careful with those countries, how we, manage and approach them and how we deal with them. We can have our differences, but we've got to be very, very careful because we've had long alliances.
Yeah, I mean, and the problem that I have is, while he screws this up, how many generations, how long is it going to take to undo the damage that they're doing right now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
we'll have to
it is
see
what it is. So
they do.
So let me ask you this, because
Mm-hmm.
as we look at this trip, what do you think? What do you think the possibility, or the worst possibility that comes out of this is?
Well, for President Trump, I think the Putin meeting.
Yeah.
Of the entire trip, if you ask me, he might fight Merkel, he might do some things at NATO, but I think the Putin meeting, I think that has to be delicately handled, and I think that's the riskiest part of this entire ball game for him overseas.
So what are we kind of thinking? Because will there be a one-on-one meeting? Do you think? Because some of the memes back here are going to be Trump's the puppet, and the puppet master is giving him marching orders and all that.
No, there's going to be a one-on-one. I just think that we have more to lose than Putin does.
Yeah.
And how do they play this? And then the nature of this whole thing going on with Russia. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you think about this for a second, if you spelled it out and said, look, I mean, just literally leveled it out to the public and said, look, I know what you're thinking. Putin and me, and, we're all colluding. Well, you know what? Our two countries are about to potentially go into this hot box against each other, and I don't care. Now, if you laid it out like that, it might be palatable, but it's not going to be laid out at that. It's like two chest-thumping, whatever, titans, and that's not laid out the right way. And it doesn't achieve anything, I think.
No, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Let's bring it back home finally. I guess Trump, signed some executive orders today, going after his favorite punching bag, and that is federal unions.
Right. You carried a lot on the Janus decision, and that was a strike, strike at labor in the last 10 days here or so with the Supreme Court decision, of course, basically allowing for right to work universally across the country with the public unions. And now, from May, when they were putting together rules, the president implements the rules today in executive orders, which basically, part of them, the big part that the unions are going to now sue, of course, but is that as a person is a union representative, then there's going to be a criteria by the White House to say to the agencies, you need to document their time. What are they doing with their time? In other words, they're federal employees. Are they doing work? Are they doing union activities? Well, I mean, I think we have to be cognizant that, if you want to talk to your union rep, you can't wait till 5 o'clock and the traffic's all running out of the building.
Right. And this is one of those things that was negotiated. So what he's
Correct.
actually doing is he's usurping the contract. And look, if you want, and this has always been my view on this, if you want to do something about how much time, stewards and representatives take in investigating grievances, handling the grievances with frontline management, and ultimately arbitrating them. If you really have a problem with that time, the time to address that is when you're sitting at the negotiating table bargaining the next contract. It's not something I believe you can do with executive order. And I think this is something that will see a lawsuit, will see, court action. My other fear is that Trump's packed the court with crazy people, and you lose on that end too.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's a lot more to this because they're going to implement it, and there's going to be a lot of workplace arguments over this one. Documenting time and who did you talk to. I mean, it's a lot of problems on this one.
Yeah, and then it comes down to
Rick, it's actually unmanageable almost.
No, it is unmanageable, but what it is it's another one of these things that allows management to constantly harass the union leadership and to harass the frontline people who are the ones who are just documenting and taking stories. Because look, I've been there. I was a steward for a number of years. I did the investigating grievances thing because you got to talk to people. You got to get each side of the story. You got to figure out if you can solve it right there and then, so that it doesn't become something that snowballs into bigger problems. That hurts morale. And it's just, if you let the system work the way it's supposed to, it works really well. But when you get people like this boogering it up, I see it like you. I think it's unmanageable, but it's more just causing more chaos and more trouble.
Sure. Absolutely. We'll see. It's going to take a while to play out, but I guarantee you within a year you'll hear a lot.
Well, here we go. Let the fun begin. Bob, I appreciate the time, man.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Seriously, I mean, the reality is if you just let the system work the way it's supposed to, it works really well. You solve problems right on the shop floor. You solve problems at the moment they happen. But that's not really what this administration wants. They want dictatorial, authoritarian control. That's simple. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by We the Working. Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day that went down in U.S. history as the Great Train Wreck. The wreck occurred at Dutchman's Curve in Nashville, Tennessee. During World War I, the train industry was bustling across the nation. Trains carried troops as well as workers to factories to support the war effort. On that fateful morning, the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway No. 1 train was heading east to Nashville from Memphis. One of the passengers on that train was George Scott. At 18 years old, George was traveling to the DuPont plant to make gunpowder for the war. He was just one of many workers on the train heading to work at the plant. The No. 4 train was traveling west. Both of the trains were running late. As the No. 4 train approached Dutchman's Curve, it received an all-clear signal from the signal tower. But then, the tower switched the signal to a red stop warning. It was too late. The train was barreling ahead on a collision course with the No. 1 train. At 7:20 a.m., the two trains collided head-on at a rate of speed between 50 and 60 miles an hour. 101 people were killed. 171 more were injured. It was the deadliest train disaster in U.S. history. The young George Scott recalled the horrible scene, saying, "I had to raise up the window, and the glass was falling all over everywhere. And I finally got out of there, and I wandered out past a cornfield, best I can remember, and I run across one of the trainmen lying there." In the aftermath of the tragedy, thousands of people helped in the rescue effort. Today's Labor History in 2 brought to you in memory of Carol Hillman, a passionate friend of workers and volunteer of the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Minimum wage.
You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you is like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
Yes, minimum wage. It might be a thing of the past. Who knows? Looking at this Brett Kavanaugh's record, are we back solidly in the days of the Lochner era? Will the 20th century be repealed? Are we going to put blacks back in the fields and gays back in the closet and women back in the kitchen barefoot? The record, not very good in my view. And to be honest, you're right from the start. This pick, again, under the taint of this administration and under Trump. I mean, Gorsuch, the stolen seat. This one, you got a guy who's under indictment. You've got a president who's under investigation, possibly indicted down the road, and a justice who's saying, well, we might not hold him accountable. Gotta wonder. Here to share some thoughts and maybe allay some of our fears. I've asked Kevin Mack to come talk with us. He's the lead strategist with Need To Impeach. Kevin, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Rick, how are you?
I'm not great, to be honest. I'm looking at this pick, and from where I sit, he's well, none of them were good, but he's right up there with the worst of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just exactly what you'd expect from a corrupt president, right? I mean, he picks the one guy that has the biggest conflict, the man who's basically already said that no president should be exempt from criminal prosecution or investigation while he's in office. You can always expect Trump to go to the lowest place he can go, and this is another example of it.
But honestly, isn't this, because, I was having this conversation just yesterday of, isn't he the one we want? Because that's a glaring thing that people can grab onto and say, look, maybe this isn't the guy we should have on the court. And maybe this gives those 4 Democrats the cover to say, wait a second, that's a bit too far. And maybe you grab one of the Republicans so you stop this.
Gosh, I hope. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we had checks and balances and the establishment in Washington actually stepped up and did their jobs? But let's be honest, since Trump's been elected, we just haven't seen it.
Right.
Definitely not by the Republicans. And I would say even among the Democrats, a lot of them are just looking the other way. So hopefully the whole process will take place and the establishment will do what they were elected to do. I mean, you walk around the country, you talk to people. We're holding a series of town hall meetings all across the country, and people are just begging for Congress to step up and do their jobs. And they haven't seen it so far. So hopefully this will be a change.
Then it brings me back to some questions that I have, because, you know, you've got this president who is under investigation. And I'm sure that, you know, that there are a lot of Republicans who are worrying because, you know, maybe they've got, you know, some things in their past that could be being looked into. It just seems to me that until this investigation is completed, until the cards are on the table, I'm sorry, I just don't think we should be making any big decisions.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, Donald Trump is a deeply flawed individual who will do anything to protect himself. I mean, I even think he'd throw his own family under the bus to protect himself.
I'm fully expecting that.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's going to be in a position to ignore Special Counsel Mueller, to make his own set of rules, to pick his own judges, potentially pardon himself, pardon his family members, you know, and all these various things. And it is a degradation of our American society. And too many people are just shaking their heads rather than taking action. You know, it's something crazy to say.
No, I mean, we really need to be taking action because, you know, I look at another one of these and I put Kavanaugh in the original intent ideology category, or am I wrong, do you think?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is another person who was chosen for one reason, and that is that he believes presidents should be exempt from criminal prosecution, right? So of course Donald Trump would pick him. I mean, because Donald Trump is about covering and standing up for Donald Trump, you know, first and foremost. And, you know, the question is, will the establishment let that happen, or will they hold him accountable and basically say, hey, you know what, there's other more qualified people. Let's choose someone else who's not tainted.
Yeah, I mean, but here's my problem. I look at, you know, this whole original intent ideology that you see on the far right, and I look at someone like Kavanaugh, who I argued earlier was, you know, with someone that this guy's been groomed almost since birth to be a Supreme Court justice. You look at his credentials. I mean, they've really moved him in that direction. But with this ideology of the original intent, which, you know, basically wipes away the entire 20th century and returns power, you know, back to not to you and me, but to the very moneyed interest into the, you know, the white landowners over 21.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a corporate takeover. I mean, it just goes one step further to what we've seen here, you know, over the last several years in our country. And that's where we, the people, come second, and corporate America and right-wing ideology come first. I mean, it's just, it's got to stop, right? I mean, we all got to step up and do what we can do, whether that's, you know, marching, signing petitions, making demands, but doing whatever it takes. And I would argue that Democrats have just been too polite and have tried to play by the rules, and it's time for us to be tougher and stand up to power, you know, and that right now is the Republicans.
At least in my lifetime, you know, Democrats have always been that one. They've always been the weaker party. In fact, I remember, you know, Dick Cheney while he was vice president, you know, someone said, you know, will Democrats cave? And he goes, of course they'll cave. It's what they do.
Yes.
And, you know, and I remember that vividly. And, you know, sadly, you know, they're not the, you know, person you want beside you in a street fight. Maybe if you need someone to hold your coat, but they're not going to mix it up with you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, Democrats and Republicans do everything differently, but one of the main things you see legislatively or electorally is that Republicans look for issues that have 30% or so support. So think about like building a wall or Second Amendment freedoms or taking away a woman's right to choose. And they use that to fire up their base and to go out and motivate people to vote on their behalf and get elected.
Right.
Democrats, in the meantime, get an issue that's got 75% support, and they walk away from it for fear of offending the other 25, right? I mean, it's an exact opposite way of governing, and it's a failed strategy. It's time for us to, like, start playing by the same set of rules.
No, I'm with you. And in Roe being one of those issues that, you know, as a society, we've pretty much, you know, the majority we want safe, legal. Like, I'm not pro-abortion. I'm pro-safety. I want my daughters to have safe, legal care in the event that, you know, that's the path that they choose. I don't want dirty backroom abortions back. I don't want people dying, especially poor people dying. But it looks like, and, you know, it looks like that's going to probably go by the wayside very soon if this guy's put on the bench.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Rick, I agree with you 100%. And so here's the big question that all of us has to ask ourselves. So I'm a big Democrat. You're a big Democrat. There's other people listening to your show. The big question is, what are people in Washington, what are the Democrats going to do? I mean, I know they're going to tweet and they're going to put stuff up on Facebook and they're going to make speeches, but what else are they willing to do? Are they willing to bring the Senate to a standstill? Are they willing to go outside the lines? Are they willing to put themselves out there or even their careers out there to do what's right for a generation of Americans that can't stand up for themselves right now.
Can they?
And honestly, I don't know.
Can they stop the process? Because look, I've got Republican friends who say, "See, the Democrats started this, Kevin. If they wouldn't have done away with the filibuster for those judicial nominees, we wouldn't be in this mess."
Yeah, but again, how many times have we seen this? Every time something like this comes up, Republicans always figure out some way to make the rules work to their advantage to get things done. And Democrats always start from the position of, there's nothing we can do.
No, I absolutely agree with you. There's no argument to that. They're much better, because I believe I think we all believe that they would most certainly go scorched earth. Nobody believes that the Democrats would burn the house down. I think everybody I know believes a Republican would burn the house down.
Yeah, totally right. I mean, we just play by two different sets of rules, and this is one of those times where it's finally time to say, stop being polite. Don't worry about cocktail parties. Don't worry about all these other things, the niceties of Washington, D.C. Step up and protect the people who put you there, and do your jobs as a Democratic Party, and do your jobs as elected representatives. It's not okay to say, well, nothing we can do on this when we did our best. That is not an acceptable answer right now.
No, I'm with you on that. But outside of holding the four Democrats, Heitkamp, Manchin, Donnelly, and I wouldn't even Jones. Jones is not up for another 2 years for election. But outside of holding the three of them, in line and voting against this nominee and hoping Rand Paul or Murkowski or Collins step forward. Outside of that, is there anything Democrats can do? Because there is no filibuster option. Is there anything technically, Marcus of Queensberry rules? I don't know. Is there any way of stopping this and demanding that Republicans follow the McConnell rule?
I mean, I'm not a U.S. senator and I'm not there every single day, but I've been in this business for a very long time. I've worked for speakers. I've worked for other legislators before. And when there's a will, there's a way on these things. There's a lot of horse trading that goes on. There's a lot of gamesmanship. There's a lot of things that happen. And the question is, are we willing to go to the lengths that it takes to protect the people who voted for us? And I just don't know that the will's there.
No, we get this. See, I remember the Gorsuch pick, and I remember saying, you filibuster this, and they're going to do away with it because they're going to regardless. And everyone's saying, no, we saved that one. We saved the filibuster for the next one because that's really the important one. I'm going, well, look, if they're going to do away with it for this one, they're certainly going to do away with it for the next one because this one really is the more important of the two, in my view, because, you just replaced Kennedy, which was a huge pickup for them for another generation.
Yeah, and this is the point. Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell play by, again, a different set of rules. And I'm sorry to keep saying it, but it's just the absolute truth. They don't care about the rules of the Senate. They don't care about the mores of Washington, D.C. They do whatever it takes to succeed. And we constantly, as Democrats, kind of go back and say, well, boy, we hope that they'll finally follow tradition, or we hope they'll finally do the right thing, or this isn't how it's always done. Exactly right. It's not how it's always done. My example of this is impeachment. So President Trump's already passed the threshold for impeachment, and he breaks the law before our very eyes every day through the emoluments clause and other things. And when you bring this up, people say, well, we don't have the votes for this, or well, it's not so bad, or let's wait till the Mueller report comes out, or whatever else it is. But at the end of the day, Trump's not playing by the same set of rules. What are we going to do to change the rules for ourselves? I don't know. I mean, but something has to happen.
But what do you say to the person who goes, Kevin, we really want this guy to the roadside, but you don't have the votes, and by Democrats, running on this and saying this is what we're going to do, it actually hinders their ability to take back the House or even the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, people say that, but I just don't buy it. I mean, we have to go out there and use the thing we have, which is our collective voices. We have to have Republicans pay a price. I mean, they don't love Donald Trump, and they can turn on him, but we have to force that to happen. So, an example is Sarah Sanders goes out to dinner, and people say, hey, you shouldn't be here, or somebody asks her to leave, or whatever, and half the Democrats come back around and say, no, we have to be civil about this thing. Well, why? Why do we have to be civil? If all we have is our voices and all we have is public shaming or calling people out, why not use it?
No, I'm right there with you. I said the exact same thing. Look, if your policies weren't so horrible, and the public didn't see you as soulless and evil, maybe you wouldn't have these problems.
Yeah, or like Ellen Dershowitz, like, oh my gosh, like I'm not getting invited to cocktail parties anymore. I'm like, really? Like, so what? Like, do we have some constitutional responsibility to invite, lawyers, constitutional lawyers to cocktail parties? No. If you're going to stand up for Donald Trump, you're going to pay a price, And by the way, I mean, ask his campaign manager or all the people who work for him. I mean, everybody who comes in contact with his president ultimately pays a price. And so if you decide to join him in his cause and you decide to enable him to allow him to do these various things, you're going to pay a price, whether it's today or tomorrow or long term, but it's going to happen, right? So, be ready for it.
No, I'm with you, but make the case for impeachment then, because I've got a lot of friends who say, well, he's just making a little bit of money off the Chinese, renting out his hotel. That's not really a high crime or misdemeanor. So make the case without the Mueller investigation. What's he done?
Well, he's committed 8 impeachable offenses. The 2 that are the most obvious are the emoluments clause. Now, you're right. Some people will say, well, he's just making a little money. He's just making a little money there. But, not really. I mean, let's look at China. I mean, we've got tariffs against China now, and all of a sudden, his daughter's getting special privileges on her tariff requests and her, the things she's looking for to do business in the country, and he's making $2 million in payments through Trump Tower, right? So, I mean, everything that happens here is that Trump is held to a lower standard than other people, right? Trump is making money on a daily basis off foreign governments. He's making decisions about those very same foreign governments. That is against the law. It's not okay for politicians or others to just kind of say, well, all of a sudden, like, that doesn't matter anymore. Yeah, it does, right? The president of the United States cannot break the law every single day or obstruct justice or put children in cages on our borders or attack the press, all these various things. I mean, it's all impeachable, right? Whether people want to believe that or not. And it has nothing to do with the 2016 election. It has to do with defending our democracy moving forward.
And, you throw the 2016 election in there, and I still believe there was coordination between the Russians, however you want to define them, the oligarchs, the front groups, the Analytica people, all down the line. I still believe there was coordination there, even if it was unwittingly because they're Junior and the other ones weren't bright enough to figure it out. But I know Manafort was.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely they were. I mean, let's not forget, Mueller's a Republican. He should be allowed to do his job without interference. So far, you've had 23 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and 1 prison sentence. And that's in 1 year. And we're just getting started. It's going to get worse and worse, and more facts are going to come to light. So again, all of our friends who we know are Republicans are saying, well, it's not so bad. They didn't know about it. They didn't know what they were doing. No, it's illegal. And if it's illegal, you need to be held responsible for it.
Yeah, when I was a kid,
it's interesting to me. Oh, go ahead.
No, when I was a kid growing up, that argument didn't hold water. Ignorance was no excuse.
No, exactly.
You broke the law. You still broke the law, even if you didn't know it was the law.
Yeah, Jared Kushner and Donald Jr. are not the 2 brightest bulbs. Absolutely right. But at the end of the day, if a foreign national calls you up and says, hey, let's get together and talk about how we can help you beat your opponent, that's against the law. And I'm sorry, these guys are bright enough to know that's a big problem. But, it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, Donald Trump's been bailed out by the Russians for his entire career. And I think actually, they thought it was perfectly normal. I mean, this is how their business is funded. They're used to getting money from Russian oligarchs. They're used to doing it somewhat dirty. And they're used to getting away with it.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, they're in a campaign that they're losing. They're in trouble. They're having a hard time raising money. So what do? Well, they reach out to their friends, the Russians, and ask for another bailout. I mean, this is the way Donald Trump survived. Nothing new.
Nothing new at all. And anybody who lived in New York or knows people who live in New York know that tale, which is why he didn't win the work. Let me ask you a last question about your work and what you guys are doing with Need to Impeach. How can people help? How can people get involved, join in? Because I know a lot of our listeners are on that bandwagon already that, this guy's got to go and that whole nine yards. What can folks do?
I appreciate that. Well, first of all, go to www.needtoimpeach.com and sign the petition to hold this president and all of his lackeys accountable for their misdeeds. That's the most important thing we can do is raise our voice. Second, we're holding town hall meetings across the country, and I think our 21st is tomorrow and 22nd the night after that. And so come out to one of these town halls, meet other people like you that want to make a difference in this election cycle. And then once you sign the petition, we'll start interacting with you through email and other things to make sure that we have a big blue wave this November I'll tell you something that a lot of people don't know. Of the 5.4 million people who've already signed our petition, 67% of them are infrequent midterm voters, right? So let me say that again. 5.4 million people stepped up, put their name on a petition to hold this president accountable, and 67% of them are infrequent midterm voters. So we're going to run a big multi-million-dollar effort to make sure these folks go to the polls this election cycle, to make sure their voices are heard, and to make sure that the establishment's held accountable, including Donald Trump and all of his enablers.
And maybe that might be just enough to get over the gerrymandering and the voter suppression of the machines and the voter ID and all of that stuff. The new blood in there might be just enough to keep them from stealing this round of elections.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tom Steyer is, working extremely hard to make sure we get all these things done. He is investing in a youth program, one of the biggest in the country. He's helping register 18-year-olds to make sure their voices are heard after the Parkland shooting. He's working with Latino communities to make sure they have the legal services they need, get registered and get out to vote. And he's working with these 5.4 million people who know we need to defend our democracy. So it's a multi-million-dollar, multi-pronged effort, and we're going to work it extremely hard for the next 118 days.
Good stuff. Kevin, I appreciate the time. I'd love to have you come back and talk to us again at some point.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Appreciate all you're doing, too. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Kevin Mack, lead strategist there with Need To Impeach. Again, the website, needtoimpeach.com. We'll get links out to make sure people can take a look at it. Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Time to talk.
When the kids are united, they can never be divided as yesterday. There's a brand new sham today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wrapped up 2 days of meetings in North Korea over the weekend. Hours after he departed, North Korea's foreign ministry chided the U.S. for repeating its, quote, gangster-like demand for denuclearization. That comment got a lot of media coverage, as some implied Pompeo had been played, or that President Trump's much-touted diplomatic summit in Singapore had come to naught, especially amid reports of North Korea's continued nuclear activity.
Overall, the focus on this gangster comment, ignoring 90% of the rest of the statement, I think really did a disservice to what it actually said.
Joel Witt is the founder of 38 North, a D.C. research group dedicated to North Korea.
The Singapore summit declaration did not mean that North Korea would stop everything it was doing in the nuclear and missile areas right away. Nor would I find that to be a reasonable expectation.
Ambassador Robert Gallucci was America's top negotiator with North Korea in the mid-1990s and says the public should set reasonable expectations for progress, and so should President Trump.
It's unfortunate, I think, when the president essentially does his version of mission accomplished and says, we don't have a threat from the North anymore, you can sleep tonight. That's really flat out misleading.
North Korean denuclearization could be years away, but Witt says one thing Pompeo can do to up the chances of success is expand his involvement in the diplomatic process. And he could do worse than model his engagement after John Kerry's sustained work toward the Iran nuclear deal.
Right now, flying into Pyongyang 2 days at a time, leaving, coming back a month later, having a working group working on specific issues at the DMZ, that's not going to do it. We're not going to get there quickly with that kind of process.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Lick.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
One of the things that really gets me about this pick, and Gorsuch as well, and you go down the Scalia, you go down the Alito, the whole Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation approved list of jurists, and they all have that original intent mentality that the Constitution can only be interpreted exactly how it is written, and you can go through hundreds of thousands of things that aren't addressed in there. They don't believe in the idea of a living, breathing document that changes with the times, and certainly not one that has any belief in equality in there. And you know, you look at the original sin of the Constitution being that whole 3/5 of a person thing, and also women not being real citizens either. You know, they still believe that. You know, that's the original intent part of all of this. And I find it, I'm always kind of baffled that there are people who would support this ideology who are outside of the white landowning males over 21. And when they, you know, it's always been my view of, you know, remember the country at the time was a very agrarian society. So the landowners were the corporate interests. They were the moneyed interests. They were the power. So when I hear people say, well, no, you know, the Constitution was written for the little guy. No, it wasn't. It was written for the ruling elite. And look, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but, you know, no one set up a system to make sure that the guy working a minimum wage job pushing a broom had any say on how the company or the wealth class lived. That's a new kind of, you know, last 100 years kind of idea. And, you know, I played the minimum wage song, you know, kiss all that stuff goodbye potentially. And, you know, I was having this conversation, you know, the last time over the weekend when I was at work. And, you know, I was talking to these guys who, you know, were all Trump voters, all, you know, claimed to be conservative, couldn't really define why, you know, outside of the hot button social issues. You know, I said, look, you know, what happens when, you know, tick down the list of things that are taken away by this court, and the pendulum swinging even further to the extreme of corporate and moneyed interest. What happens to you and your family? When, for instance, they say, you know what, insurance companies no longer have to provide care to people with pre-existing conditions, or that they have to pay just, you know, outrageous rates. What does that mean to you and your family? When half of the country has a pre-existing condition. You know, I have a friend who, you know, he says he's got 10 of them. Peter Morley, who, you know, is just a wonderful advocate for health care and a cancer survivor. And you go down the list of all of the ailments that he has. And without ending pre-existing conditions, there's no way he affords health care. There's no way he can afford to even live then. And what does that mean? Well, that means pay or die. And is that the position that we want in this country? Because, you know, the original intent idea is, well, hooray for the moneyed interests, and, well, the hell with everybody else. And you look at how the Constitution protected workers in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Look at how they were protected then. They weren't. So any worker protections, any minimum wage, any maximum hour laws, any child labor laws, those are all on the chopping block. Now, of course, it won't happen chop overnight. It'll be a slow, incremental. We're the frogs in the water right now. You know, they're not going to throw us into the boiling water. They're just going to cook it. They're just going to steam us. And it won't be, you know, this generation per se. It won't be the next 10 years or 15 years. But our kids, they're screwed. And this is the frustrating part of this. And you watch, you know, I'm watching the Twitter responses, and people are just all on the right. They're just tingly in there. They just cannot. They're just, you know, all tickly in the private parts. They're just all as happy as could be. And I don't think most of them even know why. Just that we won. And this is where, as Kevin Mack points out, this is where the work begins. You got to make those phone calls. We tweeted out the numbers to Murkowski and the Democrats and Collins and the rest of them. Call them. Call them early. Call them often. Even if you're not in their district, call them. If you're not in their state, call them. Say, look, this is the country. You hold the country in your hand. Do something about it. To me, it is that simple. But, you know, like Kevin said, you've got to be active. You've got to be outraged. You've got to be, you know, having your voice heard. That's simple. Gonna take a quick break. Right back with Sarah Kendzior. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
For more than a century, the New York Times has unabashedly bragged in a banner slogan that it publishes, quote, all the news that's fit to print. Really? Then why did it publish a June 25th front-page article that was neither news nor fit to print? It was a gut job attacking our revolution, the aggressively progressive grassroots political movement that sprang out of Senator Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential run. The Times scoffed that, quote, fewer than 50% of the more than 80 candidates OR has endorsed have won elections this year. Huh? Newsflash for clueless media cognoscenti. Winning anywhere near half of your campaigns is a stunning achievement. It's all the more stunning that it's being achieved by the feisty progressive rebels of our revolution. For nearly all of the candidates they endorse are unconventional, first-time contenders who start out with no name recognition, no fat cat money, and no support from establishment power brokers. I happen to be a board member of the upstart Our Revolution movement, so I know many of these gutsy mavericks personally, and I've seen their surprisingly successful campaigns from the ground level. They're winning because they're bringing political integrity and Bernie's big policy ideas to voters hungry for both. And because in less than 2 years, OR has organized hundreds of thousands of Democratic populists into more than 600 active political networks all across the country, including grassroots organizing in red areas the party has long ignored. This is Jim Hightower saying, asked about the Times mocking of the movement's win-loss record, Senator Sanders deadpanned, it's not a baseball game. In fact, though, even the biggest of baseball superstars have never come close to a 500 batting average, nor will the Times ever hit 500 on its pledge to cover all the news fit to print.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
What do you believe would be the repercussions for Democrats if they end up losing in the recall election?
I think honestly, there aren't going to be any repercussions.
Prima donnas, you want to call the National Guard? Let's get it poppin'. What happens in Wisconsin, don't stay in Wisconsin. Mr. President, 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 you're wrong. This is a national issue.
Yes, good old dingbat Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I look at that back in 2012 when you had the recall election going on in Wisconsin. And they put up just a horrible choice who lost in the 2010 election. Having Wasserman Schultz say that what was going on in Wisconsin was not a national issue was the moment that I beat my head silly, going, of course it is. It's the beginning of the end of civilization. And yet, all of the bad ideas that came out of Act 10 and Walker's assaults on public sector workers and on sanity, then, all across the country, like a cancer that we knew it was going to be. And here we are on a night where, again, we lost an election because Democrats didn't stand up and fight back. And, well, we're weak and feckless. And now we're going to end up with what appears to be just one of the crazier of justices. Just nuts. Anyway, here to share some thoughts, maybe a little of my rage for a change. We've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come talk with us, author of the New York Times bestselling book, A View From Flyover Country, and also the co-host of Gaslit Nation. Great podcast you must subscribe to. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So there's the quote right there of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. It's not a national. It's not a big deal what happened in Wisconsin. If we lose, so what?
Yeah, this is the kind of complacency that I think helped doom the 2016 election. And, it wasn't universal throughout the Democratic Party, just like it is now. There are people that are cognizant that don't take these things for granted. But, yeah, I think the assumption that democracy is something that just exists and that you don't have to be continually vigilant over and that you don't have to examine and fight for it's a proposition that people just didn't grasp until it was too late, and they've lost it, and we've been steadily losing more and more of these rights, over the last decade, but especially obviously since Trump came to power.
Let's jump into the Kavanaugh thing before we get into the other stuff to rage about. I'm curious your thoughts on this choice.
Oh, it's awful. I mean, the reason he was selected, it seems, is because he believes that a sitting president cannot be indicted, and he's, delivered a number of judgments that specifically this out. The president is immune from consequences for crimes. The president's so busy, he can't be bothered with prosecution. Obviously Trump did not dig through a bunch of legal briefs to find this guy, but I think it's clear that people from his advisory team did. And this, I don't want to say it dooms the Mueller investigation, but it certainly hampers it. I was skeptical that the results of Mueller's probe would actually go anywhere before this, because the GOP is unwilling to impeach, and because the Supreme Court was already leading in a pro-Trump direction. But now we basically have a situation where a suspected criminal, Trump, is able to select his own judges. That's an autocracy. He's removing one of the essential checks, the judiciary, from the control of citizens, and is just putting people in his pocket to carry out his bidding. And this is a lifetime appointment, as are many of the other judges he's selected. This dooms our country for decades to come unless people rise up and fight against this. I don't think that this appointment should be allowed. I don't think that any appointment by Trump should be allowed, and I don't think that a suspected criminal should be able to pick his judge, pick the time of his trial, and pick his jury, which is exactly what's happening.
No, but my thought on this is, maybe this guy could be that moment that Democrats find a spine, at least the leadership, and push back just on that point, because I don't think we as Americans like to believe that anyone is above the law and that anyone is above accountability. So to me, this might be that talking point, that messaging point that the three Democrats, Heitkamp, Manchin, and Donnelly, are able to stay on the right side of this, and maybe even grab a Republican to just, to gum this up a little bit to get us through to the other side of the election.
I hope so. I mean, they should have done this ages ago. They should have protested all of his appointments. They shouldn't have confirmed anybody that he put up there, because he was already under suspicion, for what has been proven to be very serious allegations of, illicit engagements with Russia, of essentially treason, on top of all the corruption that he engaged in before, and on top of all the corruption that he's engaged in office, things like emoluments violations that were impossible when he was a private citizen. And they've just been letting it go. And I think that, now people get it. They get that with every day, with every new appointment, their own power diminishes, and we're eventually going to reach a point where we don't have the opportunity to protest this, to vote against this. I'm hoping that people regret their, blind faith that they've had over the last couple years, which doom, hundreds of millions of people. I don't know what they'll do at this point. I don't have faith at all in the GOP to do the right thing. I think, the Democrats should push back on principle that this is a president who continually violates the Constitution and is in no position to pick the people who are supposed to uphold it. He violates it all the time. The issue with, migrant children, and with migrants in general, is such a grotesque violation of not only constitutional law, but of international human rights law. Like, this is not a person who should be selecting judges in any way. And they should be very, very clear on that. They've got to stop pretending that they can play by the book when the book is burning.
No, and look, I've said for years, Republicans, they are all in favor of scorched earth. You look during the Obama years, they were willing to willing to torch the country to get their way. And Democrats just kind of, continually acquiesced and continued to give in and cave into them.
Yeah, it's pathetic. To be clear, I'm still voting for the Democrats because it's absolutely necessary. It's necessary to do that, to root out the Republicans, which are a greater evil, which are, an existential threat at this point. But at the same time, I think we're obligated to criticize the Democrats and to push them in, the right direction. And that's a more assertive direction. That's one that actually acknowledges our political reality, which is, as you just said, is scorched earth tactics by the Republicans. And you can't just sit there and pretend that it's all going to work out. You know, you've got to be, I'm not sure I want to quote Avenatti right now because I'm not super thrilled about his presidential aspirations, but he's absolutely to be a street fight, to be tough. You need to, not break the law, but try to think like the enemy and find effective ways to combat that and be blunt and direct in your rhetoric. I think Maxine Waters is someone who does that very well. And I wish that more people had her honesty and her willingness, to get out there and fight, because that's what's necessary now.
No, I'm right there with you. I've said for years, Democrats are not somebody I want next to me in a street fight. If I need someone to hold my coat, I want a Democrat there to hold my coat. But they're certainly not someone who's going to be beside me during a street fight, which is why, as you've pointed out, and correctly so, that we need to be voting for Democrats and good ones. Maybe we go and we find a bunch, because I've been interviewing candidates from around the country who I'm thrilled about, that are going to get in there and roll up their sleeves and fight back.
Yeah, there's a lot of new people. There's a lot of candidates who I don't think would have entered, government service at a different time, but who feel called to action. And I think that's great. I hope that they actually get the chance to run and have people vote for them, because I still feel that voter suppression and, voter interference and also the scorched earth tactics of the GOP are not fully understood. I think I said on your show before that even if the Democrats do win, and this is not hacked, this is something that's shown, I could easily see the Republicans just refusing to concede, much in the way, that they completely stalled Merrick Garland, even though, that was a violation of protocol. I could just see that. I hope everybody is prepared, and is not going to, bow down to them, or submit in any way, because they're aiming for one party rule. And people need to understand that. And I've actually been glad to see that, former Republicans, have since left the party. They do understand that. They understand that, the Republicans have morphed into something different than what they were before. I personally didn't like what they were before either. But what they are now is essentially an apocalyptic, autocratic cult.
No, I'm right there with you. And, what's interesting is you had a number of senators and people going to Russia for 4th of July. And one of them, Kansas Senator Jerry Moran, who evidently, according to him, it really shouldn't matter because he didn't really have a good time while he was there.
Yeah, they were there. That was not exactly a political meeting. That was an energy and economic meeting. That was a meeting about dropping the sanctions, which has been the goal of the Kremlin and the goal of Trump and his little pool of lackeys, all of whom have a financial stake in having those sanctions go away and enhancing this mutually beneficial kleptocracy. This is just an example of these senators, showing that they are in on it. They approve of it. They do not have loyalty to the United States. They were meeting with people, with Russians who are under sanctions. So, this was an illegal meeting, and they did it purposely on the 4th of July, I think, in a way to kind of flaunt this. I think it's also notable that Trump's first meeting ever with the Russians, then the Soviets, back in 1987, was also on the 4th of July. They flew him out there and put him in the Lenin suite, and this kind of symbolism, I think, is very pointed. And I don't know how much control various Republicans have over what they're doing, because, as I said, the RNC was hacked, and we also know that Trump and his goon squad routinely employ threats and blackmail, and there's also just opportunism keeping Republicans in line. But nonetheless, I thought it was disgraceful, and it's even more disgraceful now that, in one of the countries that's our allies, in the UK, we have somebody who died from poisoning by, Russians aimed at the former operative who had lived there. And it's like, we're just in a position where they're just so blatant about their abandonment of our old principles, of our old allies, of everything that, I think people kind of took for granted as part of the American order.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. And I'd read that story as well. And, this president just seems to be, completely in their I don't want to say pocket, but just, kind of just completely under their spell. In fact, there was another story that just came out that evidently he was telling Putin that his stupid staff didn't want them to talk. And I'm going, who does that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he has no respect for anybody who works in the White House, which, granted, perhaps this is a quality I share with Trump, because I have no respect for basically anyone in that White House either. They are dupes, they are lackeys, but nonetheless, it's a basic aspect of a presidency to not berate your own staff to a dictator that's hacked and attacked your country. But Trump has made very clear where his loyalties lie. He's made it clear all along. He made it clear in the campaign, and he certainly made it clear in the policies that he's pursued and in the way he's behaved towards Putin, with just unrelenting deference from the minute that he got into power. And, it's annoying the hell out of me, that people are finally sort of saying, oh, yeah, I guess it really was exactly what it seemed. It's like, yes, it doesn't take a genius to understand Trump. You can, listen to kind of the worst policies he proposes, or the most blatant and audacious, violations of protocol and of loyalty. That's who he is. He's actually telling the truth there, because he can't resist bragging. He loves to get caught. He doesn't like to get punished. And so I think on some level, Trump wants us to know who he is. He wants us to know he's not loyal to this country. He's not loyal to his staff. He's not loyal to the American public, and he doesn't care. He's just going to lord it over us and, get off on that feeling.
Yeah, he's loyal to himself. That's one thing. So, is all of this stuff at some point, do we as a nation ever come back together after this? Because I have friends who how did we get here? How did all this happen? And I'm going, well, pay attention. It's been going on for a while. Is there ever a moment where we come back together? If Mueller comes out with his report, do we have an epiphany? What do you see going forward?
Wait, sorry, I think you cut out for a sec. Can you repeat the last part of the question?
What do you see, happening going forward? Do you ever see us coming back together as a country?
I mean, it's hard to tell, because I actually think that as a country, the majority of the country opposes this president. A lot of these polls lay things out in what I think is a really fatuous manner, where they're like, half of the Republicans are still with Trump. It's like, okay, the Republicans are like 27% of the country. So you're talking about like maybe 14% of the population like being deeply loyal to Trump, and, the vast majority disapproving of him, on various levels. And so, do I think America, as an idea, as just sort of an entity of some kind can be put back together? Yes, but I think we may be bonding because we're under the control, of an autocrat who will strip away resources, opportunities, civil rights, freedoms, and people won't be able, to live the way they want, which obviously is part of an ongoing process of that happening. We've seen our institutions eroding, especially over the last 40 years, like basically since Reaganomics, but it will be at a level that just, far surpasses anything we've seen before. And in authoritarian states, I've been to many, I've studied many, you don't necessarily find a lot of outward dissidence because people are terrified, but you do have a sense of people, having a kind of loyalty to country that's not the same as the loyalty to the leader. They're waiting for the leader and the corruption to go away. They don't know how to get rid of it. And so maybe we'll end up united in fear. I don't think that that's a good outcome. I think that's an outcome that we should work now to try to prevent. But in order to do that, we need to be extremely forthright about the problem. We need to use stronger language. He is a liar. He is a criminal. He is someone that absolutely should be impeached and should not be in that position of power. That to me is very basic. And I hope that it's as clear to other people. I hope people are not afraid to say those things out loud.
And even, as far back as 2017, you pointed out in March of 2017 that, Trump without oversight will be in a position akin to a suspected criminal able to select his own judge and delay his own trial. And here we are.
Yeah. I mean, it's all coming to pass. Like there's very few things that I predicted that did not come to pass, and this is not because I'm some sort of super genius prognosticator. It's because Trump follows a fairly easy to predict authoritarian pattern. You know, he's following the playbook of other kleptocrats, especially kleptocrats from the former Soviet Union, you know, which is my area of expertise, so maybe that helps. But, you know, you can see where this is going to go. The only thing that's hard to predict is public reaction and pushback. And so I hope there's more. I actually think citizens are doing a good job. I think it's understated, you know, how much that they've protested, they've organized. You know, you see mass protests being held. They don't make the covers of newspapers. You know, and I think you know from interviewing all of these candidates that there's a lot of grassroots organization. There's a lot of new ideas floating around about the direction that our country should go. And I think people are embracing those ideas. You know, they actually want to drain the swamp. They actually want to get rid of this corrupt system. And that's good. The question is, it's a race against time. You know, will people have the opportunity to do that before this completely consolidates? And every day that passes, I worry, you know, that in some sense we have, you know, I don't want to say we've lost, because I think people should always fight anyway, you know, fight as hard as you can anyway. But obviously, the longer he's in, the more dangerous the situation is for everyone.
Yeah. And the more people he puts on the court, especially on the Supreme Court, the longer that goes. Last question I've got for you. You know, Alan Dershowitz was running around for a bit, you know, whining about all of his friends on Martha's Vineyard who have been shunning him. Shouldn't he be shunned completely by the rest of us?
He should be shunned. I mean, he was accused of raping a child. I mean, like, everyone sort of glosses over this fact that, you know, Alan Dershowitz represented Jeffrey Epstein. This is like among, you know, the many horrible people Dershowitz represented, but he's probably the worst, who was a pedophile and a trafficker of underage girls. And Dershowitz was not only his lawyer, you know, which is gross but legal, but was accused himself of raping a child. And it's like, that to me is so enormous. And, you know, it was settled in court. But nonetheless, if I were the New York Times and I was interviewing Alan Dershowitz every other day, as they're apparently required to do, that's what I'd ask about. Because one of the people who is connected to that Epstein affair is, of course, Donald Trump. And so you see this nexus of, you know, just grotesque, corrupt people linked to this, you know, pedophile sex trafficking ring. I mean, that's a major story, but instead it's just about Dershowitz and his feelings, and he feels bad, and he can't go to a party, and it's such an indictment of how disgusting New York society is, that's their world. They don't care what happens to everyday people. They don't care what happens to kids. They don't care what happens to kids who are migrants, and they don't care what happens to little kids who are raped. They care about the feelings of people in their little group, which is rich people like Dershowitz or Trump, and it's just disgusting. And the New York Times is, you know, a disgusting paper for doing that.
Yeah, but it brings me to the idea of, you know, that first meeting back in 1987, because as you pointed out, Trump and Epstein were buddies, and there's, you know, you're associated by the, you know, the people you hang around. So you got to wonder if that's got to be something that's hanging over the head, because, you know, in my view, it's got to be something really ugly for Trump to be in their pocket, if that in fact is what's going on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think on one hand, you know, Trump is in it with the Kremlin, with the mob, voluntarily. You know, he's in it to make money. He's in there to protect himself. It's a way of life he's been participating in for 40 years. I don't think he knows another way. But on the other hand, you know, of course, any enemy of his, of course, the Kremlin would collect insurance, you know, would collect some sort of blackmail in case he steps out of line. And they're not only doing it on Trump, but on, you know, all of the other people he associates with, and likely a lot of members of the GOP. And yeah, I've always thought that whatever sexual blackmail exists about Trump, it's not something about prostitutes or even the P tape. I don't think that's enough to actually bother Trump, because the Trump tactic is to have a kind of humiliating or ridiculous story, mask a story of extremely serious criminal corruption. He does this all the time. He doesn't mind if people think he's a moron or they think he's an asshole. He minds if they think he's a criminal, and therefore he'll have to face consequences. And so I've always thought that whatever they gathered on him probably had to do, you know, with minors or with rape or with something that is just flat out illegal and not just, you know, or immoral.
And something that,
I
his
guess
knuckle
we'll see.
dragging, mouth breathing base might go, that's wrong. Or,
They might, they might defend it. You see how they're okay with Roy Moore. They're okay with Jim Jordan. They're okay with a lot of these guys. But, the law is the law. And if there's some sort of video of Trump, raping someone or raping, God forbid, a child, I hope that there is not such a video. Let me be clear, because of the horror of the incident itself. But if there is, it would be so blatantly illegal that something would have to be done, I would assume. My God, this is such a dark conversation. It's hard to talk about it. So in one way, I hope it's not true. Generally, I hope it's not true, but I also hope that, there are an array of other crimes that he's committed that he can be indicted on, and I really wish that people would get going on that. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm with you on the really dark, and I hope it's not true. But the sad reality is this is what we're talking about a guy who is the president of the United States.
And it's a reasonable assumption. That's the unfortunate part, because when you're friends with numerous pedophile sex traffickers, people are going to wonder why.
Yep.
And that's the truth about Trump.
There you go. Sarah, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
As always, great talking with you. And I, again, left on a really, really dark note there. And I almost speechless. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Me and my people are through. Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Scrubbed, yes, sir.
Of the official EPA administrator's schedule.
Absolutely, which happened quite a bit.
Whistleblower says EPA Chief Scott Pruitt kept secret calendar to hide industry meetings.
This is a really sad day for Minnesota. That's what this is.
Minnesota regulators approve controversial new tar sands pipeline. Record overnight heat in Oman. Drought-fueled riots in Iran. Plus,
and that's just the tip of this melting iceberg.
Rhode Island becomes the first state to sue fossil fuel companies for knowingly contributing to climate change.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I could stand here all day and cite many other PowerPoints on the damages that could be caused.
Oh, please don't. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we're getting ready to stand down for the holiday, so I guess it's only right that we have, just one or two more Scott Pruitt corruption stories before we go.
Yep, the hits just keep on coming. An EPA whistleblower testifying to the House Oversight Committee says EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt directed his staff to scrub his official calendar to hide meetings and said they kept a secret schedule to hide controversial meetings and calls with industry representatives. That's according to Pruitt's former Deputy Chief of Staff, Kevin Chmielewski. Altering or deleting records could be a violation of records-keeping laws. Pruitt is now under at least 15 active investigations for his questionable ethics practices, lavish spending, and retaliation against employees who questioned his actions.
Yeah, but these latest charges are from just another liberal Obama. Wait, you said it was his former chief of staff?
Deputy Chief of Staff.
Uh-oh.
Meanwhile, a dangerous heat wave is sizzling much of the U.S. this week, but the city of Kuryat in the Arab nation of Oman has got it even worse. Kuryat broke the world record for the hottest overnight temperature in recorded history on Friday night, with an overnight low of 109 degrees.
That was the low.
Yes, that is the lowest temperature in 24 hours, and the city remained at that extreme heat level for more than 48 hours. Climate scientists warn that average overnight temperatures around the world are trending higher, another sign of global warming. In southern Iran, the most severe drought in more than 30 years is exacerbating unrest in the already volatile Middle East. AP reports that Iranian security forces fired on demonstrators on Sunday who were protesting water scarcity. Residents of Khorram Shah in southern Iran, near the border with Iraq, are protesting salty and muddy water coming out of their taps and blame government mismanagement for lack of clean drinking water. Here in the U.S., the Minnesota Public Utility Commission has approved the controversial new Enbridge 3 tar sands pipeline against the recommendations of the State Department of Commerce and administrative law judge and over the objections of Native American tribes who say it poses an unacceptable threat to their drinking water and wild food resources. The new pipeline will allow significant increases in tar sands crude oil transported from Canada across Minnesota to refineries in the U.S. Midwest. Winona LaDuke of the Indigenous environmental advocacy group Honor the Earth pledged that they will not give up the fight.
Because someone has to stand for the water. Someone has to stand for future generations. We are not backing down. We are here, we will stand here because we have been here for 10,000 years. We're the home team, and we're not going anywhere.
In California, the Trump U.S. Forest Service has reissued a permit to bottled water company Nestle to continue to pull millions of gallons of water a year out of the San Bernardino National Forest in Southern California. Nestle had previously been exposed for withdrawing water in the drought-prone region without a permit for decades. But the U.S. Forest Service has forgiven all that.
Well, that's good, and now Nestle is going to pay their fair share for this water that they're drawing out of California, right?
Not so much. The total annual cost for Nestle to withdraw 36 million gallons of water a year is just $524.
$524 million.
Nope.
$1,000.
Nope, just dollars.
Wow.
Finally, in a press conference on Monday, Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Kilmartin announced the state has filed suit against the oil industry, becoming the first state in the United States to sue the major oil companies to recover the costs of damages to Rhode Island's coastal communities and economy. The suit alleges that oil industry executives knew their products contributed to dangerous global warming, but chose to lie about it to their shareholders and the public. The suit seeks to help pay for the cost of catastrophic consequences for Rhode Island's communities, like rising sea levels.
We will prove that they negligently failed to warn the state of the damages created by their products, they harmed the environment, and they violated the state's Environmental Rights Act. Enough is enough.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Yes, code name Crossfire Hurricane. You remember that? You remember the Trump investigation? You know, the FBI were looking into something, doing their jobs. Maybe if they'd have done it better, we wouldn't be here today with another horrible Supreme Court pick. And look, I think Brett Kavanaugh is a bad choice all the way around. Another original intentist, another one who, well, kiss the 20th century goodbye. I guess that's my position. I'm here to share some thoughts on Trump's choice of Brett Kavanaugh. I've asked Renato Mariotti to come talk with us, former federal prosecutor, also former candidate for Illinois' Attorney General. Renato, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely, Rick. Thank you.
So am I being hyperbolic by be aware the 20th century could be repealed?
Well, no, I would say that Kavanaugh is pretty much the most right-wing choice that the Trump administration could have picked. He's essentially Clarence Thomas 2.0. So you're going to get a guy who's going to vote to strike down Roe versus Wade. He already voted to strike down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He's voted to overturn EPA regulations. He's voted to, strike down assault weapon ban. This is a guy pretty much across the board that is going to, deliver a conservative right-wing Supreme Court for decades to come.
some of the questions that I keep coming back to of, first and foremost, do you think there was a loyalty pledge to Trump because of some of Kavanaugh's writings and thought on, maybe a crooked president not being held accountable? Do you think there was a loyalty pledge?
Nothing would surprise me with Donald Trump, but I don't know if one was necessary. One thing that CNN had reported yesterday, very interesting, is that the White House had reviewed an article that was written by Brett Kavanaugh after the election of George W. Bush, in which Kavanaugh said that impeaching a president would essentially, put the entire federal government into lockdown, would not enable them to do their jobs. Essentially, very much against taking action against a sitting president. You have to think that, with Trump being concerned about potential of indictment, potential impeachment, he has to feel good about somebody like Kavanaugh being the potential fifth vote to say that a sitting president can't be indicted.
Yeah, I mean, I might somewhat agree that it would be disruptive and they couldn't get their work done. But what if their work is breaking the law? I mean, what if that is? I look at you ripping kids away from their families. I mean, you look at the violations of the emoluments clause. Look, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I don't think I want my president making a boatload of money off of our country. I don't think I want them snatching kids at the border. I don't think I want them deregulating and polluting and going through all of this stuff. I mean, there's part of me that goes, I get it causes chaos, but what if they're criminals?
Well, for sure, you don't want to have somebody as a judge who has kind of categorical views like, hey, we can't have a president getting impeached no matter what he does, right? I mean, there's, what if the president is taking bribes? You don't want that president to be impeached. You want you want the federal government to keep functioning with a corrupt president at the helm. Obviously, that's why the people who created our Constitution put that power there to make sure that when you have a corrupt president, a check is put on him. And frankly, the same is true in terms of investigating and potentially indicting a president. So, this on all fronts is really a disaster, and it's why the right wing has continued to support Donald Trump, even though he's at times even gone against conservative views on tariffs and other things, because he's delivering for them on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, the other part of it is what if Trump actually does shoot someone on Fifth Avenue? Do we not hold him accountable?
Well, I don't know if Brett Kavanaugh would want to, right?
There's that,
and that's where we're at.
Let me ask you the other side of this, because, I remember John Roberts' confirmation where he said, he believed in decided law, believed in stare decisis, was going to call balls and strikes. And yet we've overturned a lot of precedents. And I look at, Citizens United. I look at Shelby County. I look at Janus. Is Kavanaugh going to give that same kind of, I'm going to believe in decided law? Or is this a guy who, like Gorsuch, willing to write the book, but, turn away from it?
Well, I think that whole analogy is just, a BS way for somebody who's a nominee to talk about law to confuse average folks, because, making judicial decisions is not like calling balls and strikes at a baseball game. There are robots who can call balls and strikes. We literally can overlay, anyone who watches baseball like I do, they put that little box on the screen and you can tell without a shadow of a doubt whether something's a ball or a strike.
Right.
And really your job is just to look at it. What a judge is doing is using judgment when there are terms in the Constitution like unreasonable searches and seizures or, equal protection of the laws, giving meaning to phrases that are, not in and of themselves clear, or potentially balancing different constitutional provisions against one another and reading them together. So there's a lot of judgment that comes into being a judge. That's why the word judge comes, it's related to judgment. And ultimately you want somebody who has the judgment to make, proper decisions that are going to respect our constitutional values. And that's the concern with someone like Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, but, here's the thing. Here's what Americans for Limited Government had to say. And they're telling us that they're fighting for the survival of America by restoring constitutionally limited government. They said that Kavanaugh is a safe, down the middle of the fairway choice who should be easily confirmed with bipartisan support. And they went on to say that President Trump has gone through the most transparent process in the history of the Supreme Court. Are we buying any of that?
It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, he's certainly a very, very conservative choice. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, I think that you would have to concede that Brett Kavanaugh is very well known as a sort of a right-wing legal thinker. He's a guy who was part of the STAR team that was pursuing President Clinton. He represented George W. Bush in Bush versus Gore. I mean, this is a man who is just, for his entire career has been advancing conservative legal causes. There's no question, where his heart lies and what kind of justice he's going to be. And that's why he was chosen.
Right. So let me ask you, in your legal opinion, is there any way to stop this guy? I mean, there's a lot of talk of, how do you keep the Democrats, Heitkamp and Manchin and Donnelly on the Democratic side and maybe pull, Murkowski or Collins or even Rand Paul to the other side? Is there a way, given his vast amount of writing and given the fact that he doesn't believe that a president should be held accountable, is there a way that you see going down the road that this could be somehow stalled, maybe to get through to the midterms? Anything?
Well, I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but in my opinion, if the Republicans did not believe they had the votes, they never would have had Trump nominate Kavanaugh. He is somebody that they're nominating because they believe they have 50 votes. They believe that they're going to be able to confirm. So, sure, it's possible we'll be able to pull Collins and Murkowski. I think if we pull a couple Republicans on the other side of it, then, you would probably hold the Democratic votes. But I don't see that happening. What I see is Kavanaugh getting through and us learning a very brutal lesson about why this election matters, and having to fight very hard in November. I think it just shows us the stakes and how high they are.
Yeah, they are. But here's the thing: I saw a clip of Susan Collins say that about Neil Gorsuch, that he wrote the book on precedents, and he was going to uphold precedents and all of this, and she ultimately voted for him. She also voted for Alito and Roberts, as I remember. I look at her now saying that she's not going to support someone who's going to overturn Roe because of the argument of precedents. How do you make that argument with Kavanaugh? And do you see her as possibly one who would go, again, they gave me assurances, and then it turning, just to backfire on her?
If Susan Collins was intellectually honest, she wouldn't vote for Brett Kavanaugh, given those statements that she made. But frankly, it's hard for me to believe that she's naive enough to think that Neil Gorsuch isn't going to vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. To me, that's the sort of statement that makes me question whether either she's naive or she thinks we're naive, because that is just, it's very hard to believe. I think there's no question that if Kavanaugh is confirmed, either Roe versus Wade is getting overturned or it's going to be very severely curtailed. Those are the two options on the table, and neither of them are very attractive to women who live in conservative states, live in places like Oklahoma and Utah and Texas.
Yeah, do you see Roe going by the wayside soon, if he's confirmed?
I think within 2 years you'll have either Roe versus Wade overturned, I think that's most likely, or very strictly curtailed, allowing very heavy state regulation of abortion, which would essentially deny it to women in a number of states. Let's say the 18 to 20 states that have laws on the books that would overturn Roe versus Wade.
It's a dangerous moment we're living in. Outside of Roe, are there any other areas that you're concerned about that people should be paying attention to? Because look, I've been saying, you've got to call all of these senators. You got to call Collins, Murkowski. You got to call the Democrats. You got to call. What is it that people go, well, what should I tell them? What would keep you up at night thinking about where this court goes?
Well, Kavanaugh has already voted to strike down a law that would ban assault weapons. He voted to strike down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as unconstitutional. He's voted to curtail workers' rights to organize. The Defense Department case, very prominent case. He voted repeatedly to strike down EPA rules. There is, unfortunately, on pretty much every issue that your listeners are going to care about, Brett Kavanaugh is on the other side, and he has taken very well documented stands.
So he's the trifecta of terrible. All right, it's the end of the world, and go to the edge, I guess. Is that where we are?
It's unfortunately, I mean, the Supreme Court has now gone to the edge, the right-wing edge. Chief Justice Roberts now is the closest thing we're going to have to a swing vote, and he is pretty far right.
So let me ask you last line of questioning then, because, Roberts was that deciding vote on the Health Care Act. And right. As I understand, he used Kavanaugh's writing to be that fifth vote. Are is the ACA done? I mean, do you see that the court, siding with Trump as their suits move through the courts?
It'll be interesting to see. The ACA has already been harmed. Obviously, they've gotten rid of the individual mandate. Republicans have, so I could see further chipping away. Kavanaugh is certainly going to enable the court potentially to take a different direction on the ACA, but I don't think that's the biggest potential harm from Kavanaugh. I think it's going to be on a lot of bread and butter issues, whether it's the right to organize or reproductive rights, or a lot of the other issues that all of us are concerned about on a daily basis.
Jane just sent me an email. I got to get a quick answer from you. What happens if they overturn same-sex marriage? Because that's a concern for some. Are all those marriages, are all those voided then?
They would likely not be voided. Ultimately, though, what would happen is states could then pass laws. It would be a state-by-state issue as to whether or not same-sex marriage would be permitted, back where we were before, where we were organizing on a state-by-state basis to get marriage equality passed. And that's where women are going to be on reproductive rights. It's gonna be tossed back to the states. And frankly, the one upside of it, if we want to look at a positive development, is it's going to spur folks to get organized around this country to fight for the rights that they thought that they had guaranteed to them.
Now, I had a conservative friend right at the beginning of the Trump term, that within a couple of days of the election, say it's going to be interesting to watch liberals become states' rights advocates. And given this Supreme Court nominee, he was clairvoyant.
Exactly right. And I think we're starting to see a lot of folks on our side of the aisle suddenly seeing the power of states attorneys general. We talked about that earlier, and now it's going to be the state legislatures, lobbying state legislatures to permit women to have access to reproductive rights. And I think there's a lot of women in states who are going to suddenly realize that elections matter very personally.
I'm with you. Renato, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Anytime. Have a good one.
Always great talking with you. Renato Mariotti. You want to check out his stuff, we'll get a link out at thericksmithshow.com. Follow him on Twitter. Fantastic guy. I love having him on. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day that went down in U.S. history as the Great Train Wreck. The wreck occurred at Dutchman's Curve in Nashville, Tennessee. During World War I, the train industry was bustling across the nation. Trains carried troops as well as workers to factories to support the war effort. On that fateful morning, the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway No. 1 train was heading east to Nashville from Memphis. One of the passengers on that train was George Scott. At 18 years old, George was traveling to the DuPont plant to make gunpowder for the war. He was just one of many workers on the train heading to work at the plant. The No. 4 train was traveling west. Both of the trains were running late. As the No. 4 train approached Dutchman's Curve, it received an all-clear signal from the signal tower. But then, the tower switched the signal to a red stop warning. It was too late. The train was barreling ahead on a collision course with the No. 1 train. At 7:20 a.m., the two trains collided head-on at a rate of speed between 50 and 60 miles an hour. 101 people were killed. 171 more were injured. It was the deadliest train disaster in U.S. history. The young George Scott recalled the horrible scene, saying, "I had to raise up the window, and the glass was falling all over everywhere. And I finally got out of there, and I wandered out past a cornfield, best I can remember, and I run across one of the trainmen lying there." In the aftermath of the tragedy, thousands of people helped in the rescue effort. Today's Labor History in 2 brought to you in memory of Carol Hillman, a passionate friend of workers and volunteer of the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wrapped up 2 days of meetings in North Korea over the weekend. Hours after he departed, North Korea's foreign ministry chided the U.S. for repeating its, quote, gangster-like demand for denuclearization. That comment got a lot of media coverage, as some implied Pompeo had been played, or that President Trump's much-touted diplomatic summit in Singapore had come to naught, especially amid reports of North Korea's continued nuclear activity.
Overall, the focus on this gangster comment, ignoring 90% of the rest of the statement, I think really did a disservice to what it actually said.
Joel Witt is the founder of 38 North, a D.C. research group dedicated to North Korea.
The Singapore summit declaration did not mean that North Korea would stop everything it was doing in the nuclear and missile areas right away. Nor would I find that to be a reasonable expectation.
Ambassador Robert Gallucci was America's top negotiator with North Korea in the mid-1990s and says the public should set reasonable expectations for progress, and so should President Trump.
It's unfortunate, I think, when the president essentially does his version of mission accomplished and says, we don't have a threat from the North anymore, you can sleep tonight. That's really flat out misleading.
North Korean denuclearization could be years away, but Witt says one thing Pompeo can do to up the chances of success is expand his involvement in the diplomatic process. And he could do worse than model his engagement after John Kerry's sustained work toward the Iran nuclear deal.
Right now, flying into Pyongyang 2 days at a time, leaving, coming back a month later, having a working group working on specific issues at the DMZ, that's not going to do it. We're not going to get there quickly with that kind of process.
Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose.
So the reality is Brett Kavanaugh is the nominee. And look, the Republicans are going to do everything in their power to move this through. And I think, like Renato pointed out, they wouldn't have put him forth if they didn't think they had the votes. And if they did, especially if they didn't have the Democratic votes, in my view. There's part of me that goes, this election, especially for those three Democrats, really tenuous. So this could be that one thing that's going to enrage the anti-crowd, the middle ground people who could have voted for them. In West Virginia, you still have some middle of the road Republicans who will vote for Manchin because of, when he was governor there and he was extremely popular. But you vote against this, it could be the end. And there's part of me that goes, the Democrats are going to roll over. The handful will roll over, and this will be the court. The question becomes, next, what do you do next? When these bad cases and these bad decisions come, because look, I fully believe Roe will go by the wayside. There is no way the Republican Party can survive if Roe isn't done away with. The evangelicals will torture them. The moneyed, the ideological money will torture them. These social issues are what the base of the party wakes up every day breathing and thinking about. If they don't deliver on that, they're done. Now, I think they're done anyway, because they're now the dog that caught the car. They have to do these things. They have complete and total ideological power. They are in complete control of all three branches of government, and the court is packed sufficiently that any of these crazy ideas will slide through. And they'll use the rule of law to justify it. They'll use their version of original intent, and they'll undo the 20th century progress of a living, breathing document. And to me, that's the scariest part, because what it will do is it will hinder our ability to make changes to our government and to our rule of law to deal with the changes that are certainly coming. And it's going to be ugly for a generation, I believe. And it's not whining, it's not complaining, it's reality. And there's part of me that goes, maybe the best thing that could happen is that Roe is done away with. And that you have a generation of young women who go back to the streets and become very militant. And maybe you have families who lose loved ones and they become very militant. We're coming to those moments, and you know, to me, we're reliving the portion of the 60s where you saw massive protests. The scary part for me now, though, is that the messaging vehicles are so concentrated. There used to be tons of newspapers back then, and you know, there was information available. Radio was scattered all over. Now the messaging machine is, you know, what's the statistic? 80% of everything we see, hear, and read, you know, is controlled by 5 multinational corporations. That's what's concerning. Now, the internet, you go, oh, we got the internet. Do we? Thanks to the end of net neutrality, you know, how much now of content that, well, maybe is shunned upon. How much of that's going to get out in the future? You got Facebook, you know, rejiggering their algorithms. You know, is Twitter next? You know, I hear people talking about, well, they got rid of 70 million accounts. Well, I'd argue most of those were probably bots. And they're kicking people off for using profanity. Personally, I'm okay with that. You should. My mother always said that, you know, profanity was just a feeble mind trying to express itself. If you can't come up with a word that isn't profanity to make your point, then maybe you shouldn't make your point. So going to be interesting to see where this goes. Now, for the next couple of days, we're going to talk about Kavanaugh, going to get into depth into some of the case decisions, what it means for workers, what it means for consumers, what it's going to mean for women, the LGBT community, for, you know, corporate rule. Now, understand, this is the court who decided the Epic Systems cases that said that all of us, if we work for somebody, are subject to mandatory forced arbitration clauses. That is enormous. To me, that should be something labor should be screaming on every street corner, going, look what they're doing to you. But we'll see where that goes. I did want to hit on one other point because we've been really Supreme Court heavy. If you remember last week, we talked about Representative Jordan and his he doesn't know anything, and you know, all of those wrestlers who accused him of knowing that this doctor was fiddling about. They were all liars. Evidently, he's changed that tune. Evidently now, now it was just locker room talk. And one of the people that was cited in virtually all of the stories, because I guess USA Today Sports did an interview with this guy, Michael Alf, who was a wrestler at Ohio State from 88 to 92, who was, you know, just effusive with praise for Jordan. You know, said, you know, it was just something everyone said. Everyone said, you know, oh, I got to go see Doc Strauss. And we'd be like, oh, prepare to drop your pants. Everybody knew it. Everybody said it. And if you remember, it's exactly what I said the scenario was going to be. These kind of people, everybody knows. And the people who are in charge, people like Jordan, don't pay any attention to it. And you go, well, maybe I missed the signals. No, BS. You should have known what was going on because you knew what was going on. And like I said about the athletic director of the high school that I went to, who got, you know, caught, you know, 250 charges of fiddling around with the little boys. Everybody knew, and none of the people in the positions of power did anything. And I look at the same thing of this president. Everyone knows he's robbing this country blind. Everyone knows he's violating the emoluments clause. Everyone knows that this guy is a criminal, and yet the Republican Party stands by, just like Jim Jordan did when people were saying, "Oh, go to Doc Strauss and drop your pants." Same thing, completely turning the other eye, completely ignoring it, and I would argue complicit and equally responsible. The question is come November, are we going to make them pay at the ballot box? You know, I love marches, love it. I love protests. I love people in the streets. Are we going to march in November? On November 6th, are we marching to the polls to throw these bums out? Sure hope so. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You missed any part of the program, download the podcast there at thericksmithshow.com. And for Rachel in the chat room, good on you. Nice job. Thanks so much. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like tides flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is color.